Greetings, people of YouTube. I am WaspStar986 and welcome back to Random Nation Studios and another thrilling episode of Who's On First? And as you can see by the title card, we're going to be talking about Bendy and the Dark Revival, the sequel, to Bendy and the Ink Machine. I'll be honest, when this game dropped November of last year, it was an event. I remember I spent most of the day bouncing around maybe half a dozen YouTube channels watching playthroughs and wishing I had the setup to play this game. It was a very fun day full of lots of popcorn and watching other people play video games. But I'm not here to gush about the game. I'm here because there was one particular element of the game that struck me as odd. Not odd as in bad, but odd as in interesting. If anyone remembers, during the events of the Dark Revival, there was one particular fan favorite character that was suspiciously absent from the story, and that was everyone's favorite mute wolf, Boris. What happened to Boris? Where is he now? Is he alive? Is he even in the game? And if so, what is he up to? Well, I did some digging, and I think I may have found the answer. And that is what I'm going to be discussing today, so without further ado, let's get into it. So if you remember playing the game or watching playthroughs of the game, there were various kinds of collectibles found throughout the world. Perhaps some of the most important regarding lore were memos. Some were signed by people we know, such as Sammy Lawrence and Sean Flynn, while others were signed by folks whose names we'd never heard before, presumably various employees from Gent and Joey Drew Studios. And then there were some that weren't signed at all, but that's a topic for another day. There was one collection, however, that really caught my eye. They really struck me as important for some reason. They were all signed Your Best Pal. I don't really know why this one group of memos stuck with me, but I was so curious as to who could have left these letters that I had to look into it. So I did just that, and what I found got my gears turning. When you hear that phrase, Your Best Pal, I'm sure at least one name pops into your head. For me, the first names I considered included Henry Stein, Allison Angel, and of course Joey Drew himself. For some weird reason, I had completely forgotten that in Bendy and the Ink Machine, the letter that Joey sends to Henry is literally signed, Your Best Pal, Joey Drew. So, obviously Joey, or at least his ghost, must be the one who wrote and left these letters for Audrey to find, right? Well, yes and no. Don't get me wrong, it's almost a guarantee that Joey wrote these memos, or at least most of them. However, I find it strange that two of them are found so close to the start of the game, while the other two aren't found until sometime in Chapter 3, soon after meeting Joey's ghost. What's more, one of these memos doesn't feel like it was written by Joey Drew at all. I'll get into that in just a moment, but first I just want to take a second to discuss all four of the Your Best Pal memos in depth, as well as analyze the areas in which they are found. So let's look at the very first memo written by Your Best Pal, literally titled The Beginning. This memo is found on the first desk upon entering the Inky realm in Chapter 1 in the Welcoming Chamber, and it reads, Every great story begins in mystery. Although things may be dark at the start, the truth will illuminate your way. Don't be afraid of who you are, fear only what you may become and banish it away. We see a copy of this same memo titled Something Familiar in Joey Drew's stronghold on the bed. I'll discuss the second memo in just a second, but the fourth memo, titled White Rabbit, is found in the room past Joey's gravestone on the table, and it reads, Don't ever lose hope. When in doubt, the answer you seek is usually nearby. We all have dreams, ghosts in our past, but those ghosts can give us the path forward. Now, given the wording and the context in which these memos are found, it's obvious that they were written by Joey Drew. However, it's the second memo that really caught my eye. The second memo written by Your Best Pal, titled Be Careful, is found on a stool after climbing a brick wall to the second floor of Heavenly Toys, and it reads as follows. Around here, it's best to stay out of sight. Don't ever go running into some place if you don't know what's in there. If you attack a problem head on, you're going to find yourself in trouble, and that's just foolish. You gotta watch, listen, and when the time is right, push forward. Notice how the other three are found in areas that in some way link back to Joey Drew. The first memo not only echoes the kind of optimistic propaganda Joey would spout to his employees every single day, but it's found twice, and the second time is in Joey's bed. The fourth memo is also very similar to Joey's soapy promotional speeches, and is found not far from Joey's grave, and it literally mentions dreams and ghosts. But the second memo doesn't really feel like it traces back to Joey in any notable way. In fact, given the way it's worded and the place in which we find it, it feels like, well, genuine advice. Advice coming from someone who knows exactly what they're talking about. The advice that only someone who's been there, done that can give. And if it wasn't already obvious, I'm talking about Boris himself. I believe that Boris is the one who wrote and left this particular memo for us to find. Let me explain. Now let's take a moment and really deconstruct this second memo. Again, we find it in the Heavenly Toys workshop. There are a few relevant characters with ties to this area, including Alice Angel and Sean Flynn, has at least a loose connection to the Heavenly Toys workshop. But there's one more character with an arguably more important link to this area, and that is, of course, Boris. First, it's important to know who exactly Boris is. According to the novel Dreams Come to Life, the soul inhabiting our old pal was once an employee of Joey Drew Studios named Daniel Buddy Lewick. Buddy worked as a gopher at the studio, which means he would have been seen coming and going all over the property at some point or another. What's more, as seen in Benny and the Ink Machine, Buddy seems to have settled in and made himself right at home in a hidden stronghold originally set up by everyone's favorite slacker handyman, Wally Franks, as revealed in the aforementioned novel. Now, what does any of this have to do with the second memo? Well, think about what it says and where we find it. Heavenly Toys, the same place where Henry and Boris go and first encounter Twisted Alice, presumably without any knowledge of Alice even being there. This is admittedly a little odd, considering in The Dark Survival, one of the many mysteries we unravel is the story behind Mila, who was actually Twisted Alice using her voice acting skills to lure in unsuspecting victims, which is apparently how she managed to capture and slaughter so many of the Boris clones. It is interesting how in The Dark Survival, Boris follows Mila's tapes only to discover Alice. Then in Benny and the Ink Machine, Henry winds up finding Alice and releasing her in the same place Boris found her in The Dark Survival. Or at least it certainly looks to be the same place. At the end of Chapter 3, Buddy gets snatched up by Alice, who then proceeds to torture and dismember him, turning him into a seemingly mindless, hulking puppet that goes on a rampage and attacks Henry at Alice's behest during Chapter 4 finale. This all might seem inconsequential, but as we see in The Dark Revival, these beings do seem to retain some memories of events from previous cycles. After Allison skewers Twisted Alice to save Audrey, she holds Alice and remarks on how this feels familiar, suggesting she's experiencing a sort of macabre deja vu. So what exactly does all of this mean? And what, if anything, does this have to do with my overarching theory? Well, like I said at the beginning, Boris the Wolf is suspiciously absent from the game. Or so it would seem. Boris is in fact in this game, you just have to be bothered to really look to find him. First, let's take a look at this, because I found it and I want to talk about it. This is a screenshot of Buddy Boris's page on the Bendy Wiki, and it says, thanks to Wilson's tampering with the nature of the cycle, Buddy was able to avoid being captured by Alice. However, he is seen in various parts throughout the game and seems to be searching for something. And then we have this. If you remember in Benny and the Ink Machine, one of the last major updates made was the addition of the archive, where we got to see the various character models, evolutions of the creatures and characters, etc. And in Benny and the Dark Revival, we also got an archives room where we see much of the same material. Here we have the character model and description for Tom, Allison Angel's beau. And his character's description is quite interesting because while it really tells us nothing new about Tom, it does give us an interesting little tidbit about Boris. It says, Tom is Allison's silent protector and the only Boris clone involved in the main story. Where is Boris the Wolf? Rumor has it that during the events of the game, Boris is experiencing a dark survival story of his own. So not only has it been noted for the record that Boris has been seen in the game, but it is said outright in the game itself that Boris is here. The first time we actually get to see Boris is right near the start of the game, and it's probably a moment almost everyone has already seen. Right after activating a lift door, if we turn around for just a split second, we can catch Boris walking away where he vanishes around the corner, seemingly poofing out of existence. And it doesn't matter how fast we run, we aren't able to catch up to him. And because Boris disappears so fast, a lot of fans, myself included, wasn't sure if this was Boris or Tom. Fortunately, a small subset of the gaming community has managed to hack the game, and as you can see in this screenshot, this is undoubtedly Boris. And if the information provided in Tom's character description is to be believed, this Boris is none other than our old pal Buddy. The only other time that I've been able to find where Boris makes a cameo in the Dark Revival actually requires us to put in a bit more work. In Chapter 4, I believe, if we go back to the Gent building and wait a bit, we can see Boris yet again making his way through the vent on the opposite side of the hall. Again, thanks to hackers, we are able to see that the model used is indeed that of an ordinary Boris clone. And since there don't appear to be any other Boris alive in the cycle at present, this has to be Buddy. Because it definitely is not Tom. Now, did you happen to notice something interesting about the places where we spot Boris? The first time we see him isn't that long after we start the game, and it's not far from where we enter the Heavenly Toys workshop. The second time that we're able to spot him is quite a bit later in the game, and Boris appears to be going in the direction from where we came from, almost like he's beating a hasty retreat, or as hastily as one can move inside of a cramped vent. It's also worth noting that the pit is found not far beyond the pathway we take through the vent of the Gent building. So getting down to business, what exactly is my theory here? Well, to answer that, we have to look to the game one last time, specifically the game's finale. During the big final boss battle, Audrey assumes command over Beast Bendy and steers him to the end of this very big hallway? During which we run into a number of familiar faces, including Henry Stein and Sammy Lawrence, two of the characters we found locked up in the pit. The pit is basically a prison that Wilson and the Keepers set up to hold those who they probably felt would pose a threat to Wilson's plans. Even our good buddy the projectionist makes a cameo here in the form of his severed head. Now, why does this matter? Well, take a second and consider the situation. Wilson and the Keepers have apparently found a way to freeze the cycle in place. And if you remember Benny and the Ink Machine, Henry Stein's whole adventure climaxed and concluded with Henry showing Bendy the final reel and starting the cycle over. Basically hitting the hard reset on the world and everyone living within it. Naturally, this is something Wilson and his underlings would want to prevent at all costs. Hence the reason why the pit even exists. And I'm guessing that Wilson snatched up Henry very early on in his takeover of the Inky realm. While we don't know how long Henry and the others have been trapped here, it's likely they've been there for a while now. What's more, only one prisoner has ever escaped, at least that we know of, that of course being Twisted Alice. How she got out is a complete mystery, but the fact that she escaped at all shows that Wilson's prison isn't inescapable, nor impenetrable. So with all that being said, how did Henry and Sammy escape to meet with Audrey during the big showdown? Simple. Jailbreak. I know this sounds crazy, but hear me out. After being freed from his fate as Alice's victim, I suspect that Boris may have somehow found out about Wilson's plot and decided to lay low until the moment was just right. He took his time finding Henry and then waited until the moment was perfect to spring him. Whether or not he had a hand in springing Sammy in the projectionist's head is unknown to me, but given how Audrey would have needed as many hands as she could get to help, I wouldn't put it past Buddy. And even if he didn't, he most certainly would have sprang Henry, who may have freed the others to go and help Audrey. As for that one Your Best Pal memo, I suspect Boris pragmatically left it in the Heavenly Toys workshop where Audrey could find it in hopes that it'd provide some guidance. The reason he signed it Your Best Pal was possibly to hide any hint of himself just in case someone else found it first. We all know Boris isn't exactly the bravest character in the cycle, and he'd probably prefer to leave the fighting up to more capable people than risk winding up someone else's freaky science experiment. If you don't believe me, look again at this memo. You got to watch, listen, and when the time is right, push forward. Basically, this memo lays out Buddy's entire plan. And, I mean, even if Boris is a bit of a chicken, he's far from stupid. The fact that we spot Boris several times throughout the game in areas that are highly suspicious and near where significant story beats take place. I know this isn't a FNAF game, but I refuse to believe that this is all simply coincidence. And with that, we have reached the end of this painfully long video. Honestly, I'm really excited to see what the Meatly and friends do with Bendy going forward. Given that there is a not-so-subtle nod to Boris in the Dark Survival in Tom's character description, I highly doubt that this is truly the end of the franchise, and I can't wait to see what comes next. I'm hoping that maybe we'll get a DLC for the Dark Survival, or even better, another Bendy game where we'll get to see Buddy Boris again alive and well. But in the meantime, thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please give this video a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below, and if you'd like to see more content, consider subscribing to help out my fledgling channel. Just as a quick side note, for some dumb reason, YouTube has a nasty habit of unsubscribing people. So if you've already subscribed, please make sure that you are still subscribed to Random Nations. Also, if you'd like to reach out to me and to discuss or suggest ideas for future videos, I'll link my main socials down in the description. Until next time, I am WaspStar986 of Random Nation Studios. Be sure to stay safe, stay awesome, and stay random. Peace!